Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. This is the second of three videos that I'm doing on Act 3, Scene 5 of the play Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. So without further ado, let's start with the recap. One of the most important things to keep in mind about Romeo and Juliet is that it is a tragedy of speed. Everything happens much too quickly for any of the characters to do anything about the tragic outcome. Romeo and Juliet meet at the Capulet ball on Sunday evening, have one singular private conversation in the Capulet orchard that very same night, and get married the next day. It is also worth remembering that this all happens in complete secrecy. Neither Romeo's nor Juliet's parents, not even Romeo's friends, know about their secret wedding. The only people who do know about their well-ringed relationship are Friar Lawrence and the nurse, who both enable Romeo and Juliet's behavior. The friar because he thinks their marriage might resolve the feud between the two families, and the nurse because she and Juliet are very close and she genuinely wants to help her. From Friar Lawrence's cell, Romeo goes to meet his friends, Benvolio and Mercutio, in the streets of Verona, runs into Tybalt, who Mercutio thinks is insulting Romeo, so they get into a duel in which Tybalt kills Mercutio. Romeo then kills Tybalt in revenge, on the very same day that he got married to Juliet. This marks the turning point of the play, where Acts 1 and 2 are mostly focused on the developing relationship between Romeo and Juliet. Act 3, Scene 1 is the moment their private love meets public consequences. Tybalt kills Mercutio and gets killed by Romeo in revenge, and Romeo gets banished from Verona for killing Tybalt. The rest of Act 1 takes place on the same Monday afternoon as Act 3, Scene 1. In Scene 2, Juliet learns about Romeo's banishment and despairs, so the nurse goes to fetch Romeo. In Scene 3, Friar Lawrence tells Romeo about the prince's decision to only banish him instead of sentencing him to death, which Romeo instantly despairs over too, claiming that this sentence is worse than death because it separates him from Juliet. The friar tries to calm him down by coming up with a sensible and actionable plan, but in Scene 4 we learn that Juliet's parents intend to go ahead with Juliet's wedding to Count Paris. They've even scheduled it for the upcoming Thursday, which is about 2 days from where we are right now in the timeline of the play. Scene 5 opens with Romeo and Juliet's last private moment together, which they don't know is the last conversation they will ever have with each other. They argue over whether it is morning already, using birds as symbolism. The nightingale symbolizes the night and their desire to stay together. The lark symbolizes mourning and their need to separate, lest Romeo be killed for disobeying the prince's orders. Interestingly, it is Juliet who tries to convince Romeo that it is still night and that he can stay a little longer, which is a marked shift away from her usual sensibility and practicality. This shows that since falling in love with Romeo, she has shifted closer to him in behavior as well. However, when Romeo readily agrees to stay, even if it means his own death, Juliet quickly becomes rational again and sends Romeo away. In her following monologue, in which she addresses fate directly, we see that she hasn't entirely abandoned her rationality for the sake of Romeo. She still tries to outwit fate by using logic. And this is where we left off at the end of the last video. One thing I'd like you to pay attention to, my fellow readers and story lovers, is how Juliet gradually finds herself with fewer and fewer people that she can rely on. Romeo is the first. He is physically removed from her by circumstances outside of her control. But as we move through the analysis of the next 150 lines or so, you'll see that Romeo isn't the only person that Juliet loses. One by one, the people Juliet has relied on for most of her life either fail to support her or let her down. And that's something you need to remember for when we get to the end of this scene in the next video. But let's talk analysis now, shall we? So, Lady Capulet walks into Juliet's room and finds her daughter crying by the window, where, if you'll remember, Juliet has just said goodbye to Romeo. And immediately Lady Capulet berates her for crying. She says, "Evermore weeping for your cousin's death? What, wilt thou wash him from his grave with tears? And if thou couldst not make him live, therefore have done. Some grief shows much of love, but much of grief shows still some want of wit." Basically, what she's saying here is, stop your crying, you stupid girl. All your tears won't bring Tybalt back, you know. And besides, an excessive show of emotions is unseemly for a young woman such as yourself. So get yourself together, will you? Now, if that sounds overly harsh to you, then that's because it is. That's the intent. The audience is supposed to immediately gather from this that Juliet and her mother don't have the warmest of relationships, and that Lady Capulet believes that showing your emotions outwardly shows a lack of good sense. Now, keep that in mind for this next bit. Lady Capulet then turns the conversation toward Romeo and calls him a villain in line 79 for his offense of killing Tybalt. Juliet's first response is an aside. She says, "Villain and he be many miles asunder," meaning that Romeo couldn't be further from a villain. Now, an aside is when a character makes a short comment that reveals their thoughts to the audience, but it is generally understood that the other characters on stage cannot hear them. This means that the audience knows Juliet's true feelings about Romeo, but her mother does not. Which means that for the entire next bit of their conversation, when Juliet says something, her mother hears one thing, but the audience knows Juliet to mean something else. Let's get into that, shall we? Lady Capulet tells Juliet that she intends to send a man to Mantua, where Romeo has been exiled to, so that he can poison and kill Romeo, and Juliet picks her words so carefully that it seems like she agrees with her mother, but she actually means the exact opposite. Here's what she says. "Indeed, I never shall be satisfied with Romeo till I behold him dead. Is my poor heart so for a kinsman vexed? Madam, if you could find out but a man to bear poison, I would temper it, that Romeo should, upon receipt thereof, soon sleep in quiet. Oh, how my heart abhors to hear him named, and cannot come to him to wreak the love I bore my cousin upon this body that hath slaughtered him." Now, to temper in this context can mean both to mix or to weaken. So, what Lady Capulet hears is something along the lines of, "Oh, I will never be satisfied until my cousin's murder is avenged with Romeo's death. Do but find a man, mother, and when you have, tell me, so that I can mix this poison myself to make sure Romeo dies as soon as he drinks from it." But what the audience hears is more along the lines of this. "Oh, my heart will never be satisfied until I behold my beloved Romeo again. Please tell me, mother, when you have found a man, so that I can give him a weakened poison to make sure Romeo will not die when he drinks from it." Now, this shows both how rational and quick thinking Juliet can be, even under extreme circumstances. And what she's doing here is merely listening to her mother's advice. She's not showing her true feelings outwardly. However, I would also like to point out that Juliet isn't lying to her mother out of malice. The truth is simply no longer an option for her. Lady Capulet has just called Romeo a villain and openly announced that she intends to have him killed. How is Juliet supposed to tell her mother that she is married to this man? She simply can't. Telling the truth wouldn't just endanger Romeo, it would also expose Juliet herself. So she tells her mother what she wants to hear while simultaneously letting the audience know that that's not what she means. So far, Juliet has managed to navigate this conversation with her mother remarkably well, given the circumstances. Unfortunately for her, Lady Capulet isn't done yet. She informs Juliet that her father has decided that she is to marry Count Paris this Thursday, which, if you remember, is just 2 days from now. And Juliet responds very differently this time. She says, "Now by St. Peter's Church, and Peter too, he shall not make me there a joyful bride. I wonder at this haste that I must wed ere he that should be husband comes to woo. I pray you tell my lord and father, madam, I will not marry yet, and when I do, I swear it shall be Romeo, whom you know I hate, rather than Paris. These are news indeed. This is as honest and direct as Juliet gets in this entire conversation. Up until this point, she has carefully hidden her true feelings behind double meanings and wordplay. Here, she downright refuses by simply saying, I will not marry yet. However, she follows even this bit up with another example of dramatic irony. She says that when she does marry, it will be Romeo rather than Paris. Her mother hears this as sarcasm because she believes that Juliet hates Romeo, but the audience knows her to be 100% genuine because we know that she's already married to Romeo. And there's another layer of irony here, too. Juliet says that she finds it strange that she is to marry someone who didn't even have the courtesy to court her properly. Yet, one day earlier, she herself married Romeo after only knowing him for less than 24 hours. One might think she's being hypocritical here, but the difference is simple. Romeo was her choice. She's not objecting to marriage herself. She's objecting to a marriage that was arranged without her knowledge and consent. In doing so, Juliet quietly insists that she should have a say in whom she marries, which is a remarkably radical position for a young woman in Shakespeare's time. Lady Capulet's response is simply that Juliet should tell her father this, which she promptly gets the chance to because at this precise moment Lord Capulet enters the room. And with his entrance, the conversation goes in a slightly different direction. Like I said in the summary of this scene in my last video, when Lord Capulet sees that Juliet has been crying, he is slightly bemused at this. He says to her, How now, a conduit girl? What, still in tears? Evermore showering? In one little body thou counterfeits a bark, a sea, a wind. For still thy eyes, which I may call the sea, do ebb and flow with tears. The bark thy body is, sailing in this salt flood. The winds thy sighs, who, raging with thy tears, and they with them, without a sudden calm will overset thy tempest-tossed body. So he compares her eyes to the sea, her tears and sighs to a storm, and her body to a boat trying to navigate it. Now, this could be intended as a joke. Lord Capulet sees his daughter crying and wants to lighten the mood with some humor. Alternatively, this could be meant as a little bit of a dig against Juliet. Similarly to Lady Capulet, Juliet's father simply doesn't understand why she's being so emotional and makes fun of her for it. It could also be that he is simply oblivious to Juliet's distress because he is in such a good mood about the upcoming wedding to Count Paris. The text doesn't tell us which reading Shakespeare intended, by the way. It's left pretty open to interpretation. As a result, this part of the scene depends heavily on how the actors perform it, which is very typical for a Shakespeare production. You will never see the same Shakespeare play twice if it's a different production. Regardless of which reading you prefer, though, one thing remains striking. Neither of Juliet's parents asks her why she is so distressed. Lady Capulet simply tells her to stop crying, and Lord Capulet doesn't understand why she's even crying so much in the first place. But neither thinks to ask why she's so upset in the first place. And instead of letting Juliet answer and explain, he immediately turns to his wife and asks, How now, wife, have you delivered to her our decree? This suggests that Lord Capulet's attention is firmly fixed on the upcoming wedding rather than his daughter's emotional state. When Lady Capulet informs him that Juliet refuses to marry, Lord Capulet becomes genuinely confused, which becomes evident in the number of questions he asks in response. How, will she none? Does she not give us thanks? Is she not proud? Does she not count her blessed, unworthy as she is, that we have wrought so worthy a gentleman to be her bride? Basically, he just doesn't understand how Juliet could refuse to marry Paris when he is such a good match for her and says that she should be happy and thankful instead. He also calls her unworthy, which is just a small taste of what's to come. Because when Juliet refuses again, Lord Capulet's confusion gives way to outright anger. And Shakespeare signals that shift very clearly through Capulet's language. Instead of asking questions, he launches into a torrent of insults. He calls Juliet a chopped logic, a mistress minion, a green sickness carrion, a baggage, and a tallow face, and also says that if she won't go to the church herself, he will drag thee on a hurdle hither. Now, that all seems like a lot. That's because it is. Let's go through those one by one because each insult gets worse than the one before. First, he attacks Juliet's behavior. A chop logic is someone who twists words, so Capulet is clearly unimpressed with Juliet's eloquence when she uses it to talk back to him. Keep that in mind for now, I will come back to it later. He also calls her a minion and a baggage. Minion is just an old fashioned word for a brat, while baggage was a Shakespearean insult for a disreputable or worthless young woman. In other words, Capulet doesn't just criticize Juliet's behavior anymore, he's going after her character. Green sickness carrion is where it gets really interesting. I already talked about green sickness in Act 2, Scene 2. It was a sickness that Elizabethans believe affected young women, particularly virgins. The main symptom was a very pale complexion, which is also what tallow face refers to, and the cure was supposed to be marriage, i.e., sex. And carrion means rotting meat. So, in a roundabout way, Capulet is calling Juliet a rotting corpse that needs to get married. And if she refuses, then he will drag her to the church using a hurdle, which was a sledge that was used to drag people to their execution. So, with the same breath that Capulet insists Juliet gets married, he also compares the wedding to an execution. And he wonders why Juliet is reluctant to get married. I called Lady Capulet Mother of the Year twice in my last video, but Lord Capulet isn't all that much better, is he? Juliet is really having to deal with a lot from her parents here. Now, one thing I want to bring up is that a lot of first time readers get a little confused by Capulet's sudden loss of temper here. I've heard people say things like, I just don't get it. He seemed so fond of Juliet at the beginning of the play. He didn't want her to get married. Why is he being so insistent now? First of all, those people aren't necessarily wrong per se. In Act 1, Scene 2, Capulet was being more hesitant when it came to Juliet getting married. He wanted Paris to wait 2 more years. But for one thing, and I've said this before, he was never opposed to Juliet marrying Paris. He just wanted her to be a little older when she does. So, what changed? Well, part of the answer may lie in Tybalt's death. Tybalt was his only male heir, the one who would carry on the family line. Now, Juliet is the only child he has left, so he needs her situation sorted, and he needs it sorted soon. Second of all, we've already seen Lord Capulet lose his temper in his argument with Tybalt in Act 1, Scene 5. When Tybalt doesn't immediately back down and instead talks back to him, he threatens Tybalt too. Be quiet, or for shame, I'll make you quiet. So his anger in this scene doesn't come completely out of left field. However, what is striking is that Capulet's reaction to Juliet's disobedience is much more extreme than his reaction to Tybalt's was. Listen to what he says to Juliet, even when she literally beseeches him on her knees. And yes, that bit is part of her dialogue as well as in the stage direction, and longtime viewers of this channel will know how rare that is for Shakespeare. Capulet says, Hang thee, young baggage, disobedient wretch! I'll tell thee what, get thee to church a Thursday, or never after look me in the face. Speak not, reply not, do not answer me. My fingers itch. Wife, we scarce thought us blessed that God had lent us but this one child, but now I see this one is one too much, and that we have a curse in having her. Out on her, Hilding! First of all, he calls her a lot of names again. Second of all, he threatens to hit her. That's the bit about his fingers itching. And then he says to his wife the Shakespearean equivalent of, I have wished we'd never had this child. Wow, just wow. This is astonishingly cruel. But he even takes it one step further. In lines 190 to 195, he says, Thursday is near, lay hand on heart advice, and you be mine, I'll give you to my friend, and you be not, hang, beg, starve, die in the streets, for by my soul I'll ne'er acknowledge thee, not what is mine shall never do thee good, trust to't, bethink you, I'll not be forsworn. He threatens to completely disinherit her and refuse her as his child. Bear in mind that this would mean complete social ruin for Juliet. She would be a complete social outcast afterwards, with no family or financial means to fall back on. So yes, Capulet threatens Tybalt, but he completely humiliates Juliet. Lord Capulet storms out, and Juliet immediately turns to her mother for help. But Lady Capulet refuses, essentially saying the Shakespearean version of, You've made your bed, now lie in it, and leaves as well. This is an important moment. By the time both parents have exited the scene, Juliet has effectively lost them both. Lord Capulet has been openly hostile and threatened to disown her if she continues to refuse to marry Paris, and Lady Capulet has just made it clear that she will not protect her daughter from her husband's wrath. Remember what I asked you to pay attention to in the recap section? One by one, the people that Juliet should be able to rely on abandon her. Romeo has been physically removed from her at the beginning of the scene, and now both her parents have proved themselves unwilling to support her to the point of being downright cruel. At this point, she's only got one person left, and that's the nurse. But that's going to be next video's subject. For now, let's move on to this video's conclusion. So, at the start of the scene, Romeo is physically removed from Juliet because he has to leave for his banishment in Mantua. His departure is immediately followed by Juliet having a premonition of Romeo's death, which reinforces the play's ample use of foreshadowing and reminds the audience of the impending tragedy. In her conversation with Lady Capulet, we learn that Juliet and her mother don't have the warmest of relationships. Lady Capulet is emotionally harsh with Juliet and berates her for crying, but never actually asks why her daughter is upset. Additionally, she calls Romeo a villain, not knowing that he and Juliet are married, and openly plans to have him murdered, which Juliet cannot outwardly react to, not only because it would endanger Romeo, but also because it would expose her own secret marriage to him. Then Lady Capulet informs Juliet that she is to marry Count Paris this Thursday, so 2 days from now, knowing full well that Juliet and Paris have never met before. When Juliet refuses, she leaves her to the mercy of her father, who, as we have already seen, is not very merciful. Lord Capulet's progression from bemusement through confusion and anger to outright cruelty mirrors the increasing pressure that Juliet has to manage while still being unable to tell her parents the truth. Over the course of his rant, Lord Capulet stops treating Juliet like his child and more like something he can dispose of if she continues to disobey him. By the end, he has called her every name under the sun and threatened to disown her and kick her to the streets, which would mean complete social ruin for Juliet. Lady Capulet confirms once again that she is not someone Juliet can rely on when she leaves her to face the consequences alone, which means the only possible ally that Juliet has left is the nurse. And her advice turns out to be less reliable and helpful than Juliet was probably hoping for. But we're going to look at that in full detail in the next video. For now, this is me signing off. No, that was not a good take. Genuinely practicality. No, that's not how you pronounce that word. And wants to lighten the mood. Out on her hilding. My God, what is it about that sentence? Ooh. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.